Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
And welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. I almost said the word linguistic wrong.
Yes!
Did you hear it? Did you hear a little
yes,
catch in my throat? I don't know how I was going to say it, but...
I don't know, but it's really easy to mess up the pronunciation of words.
It is, especially when you're like, people are going to be listening to this beyond you and me. So I'm like, I got to get this right. But it's... I take it way more seriously than I need to at this point. I don't think people are going to stop listening because I said linguistic or something on accident.
Yeah, and if they did stop listening just for that, that would be, I don't know.
Bizarre.
That would be their thing, not our thing,
yeah.
And it's fine.
It's like, I don't know. Just the straw that broke the camel's back or something. Yeah, that reminds me of, I was listening to My Favorite Murder, and Georgia said that she broke up with someone because they pronounced GIF like GIF. And you know, I say GIF.
Yes.
But it's funny because Karen was like, but that's not the only reason why, like, you know, it's kind of like she was like, yeah, of course. I mean, there are other things, but then that was the reason. That's the reason why I finally did it. And I thought that was pretty funny.
That is pretty funny, but also either pronunciation is fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think I've stopped telling people that because I'm just like, I don't know. I'm not going to be able to convince you. If you wanted to have this hill, I guess you can have this hill.
Oh, but there are so many other hills that are more important.
There are. Well, yeah. Speaking of, I mentioned this. I remember I saw this on Twitter like 5 days ago, and I was like, we need to talk about this in the intro because it's so important. Joaquin Castro. So he's a congressman, and he's chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He introduced the Change Act, and it's Correcting Alienating Names in Government Act. So it would eliminate words like alien and illegal alien from any federal documents, specifically from the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's going to like eliminate all this dehumanizing language, which I think is long overdue. And I think the first time I noticed this, I have my grandfather's green card, and it says alien registration card. And I remember seeing this as like a teenager and thinking, that's really dehumanizing. Like, just the language is really dehumanizing. Do you have something like that?
Of course.
So you have the same thing, and it says alien registration card?
It says alien on it. Yeah. So, like, because I'm a Canadian, but long before I moved to the United States, I knew that was the terminology used in this country, and I was like, "That's so bizarre."
Yeah,
like that's not the terminology used in Canada, and I doubt it's used in many other places. It's very weird.
It's weird. I mean, I don't know who came up with it, who wrote the first, what is it, the Immigration and Nationality Act. I'm sure that it is, you know, the foundation is racism. I mean, it's just another word that like one step removed from human. I mean, it's so gross. It's so icky, and I'm so happy that he proposed this, and I hope it goes through. I mean, this is, again, maybe because I'm a linguist, maybe because just getting my grandfather's green card when I was so young as a gift, that it sticks with me as something that's really disgusting and needs to be changed.
It absolutely needs to be changed 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, words matter.
Words do matter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, so today we're talking about something really important.
Yes, it's kind of related to this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it even even underscores more how important words are.
Right. Although it's more about the content of a message as opposed to an individual word.
Yes,
but still...
absolutely. Words into a sentence, into a discourse. But the building blocks are words. Well,
yes, they sure are. We talk about how important interpretation services are in the United States, and actually how they're legally mandated in many, many arenas.
Yeah, and many people don't know that. But it's been so since the 1965 Civil Rights Act. I mean, it's been updated and, but for a long time this has been something. And a lot of people skirt around the issue because assholes.
And money.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Speaking of
money. Hey, yes. Pivot.
We have a Patreon, and we're getting kind of close to being able to pay for transcripts.
Yes.
So our next goal is being able to pay for transcripts going into the future. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to support us, check us out at patreon.com/vocalfriespod.
Yes, we're completely independent. And we like it that way. We aren't beholden to anyone. This is a clean campaign.
Nice.
So help us out, and we can remain clean. Yeah. So should we get to the very important episode that we have?
Yes.
So today we have Megan Strom. She's an assistant professor of Spanish at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Her research focuses on the representation of ideology in Spanish and English language media in the United States and the ways in which linguistic and semiotic structures in these media perpetuate or challenge the negative representations of Latinx immigrants. But today we're really excited to have her here to talk to us about something she does on the side beyond the university, which is serving the local Spanish-speaking population as volunteer medical and legal interpreter, ESL teacher, and community organizer to provide quality resources in Spanish to Latinx immigrants. Thank you so much for being here, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is always so weird to say your own name to someone else. I don't know why. It's like,
Megan Squared. Megan Squared.
And you spell your name correctly.
We do.
So.
We do. No prescriptivism there.
Yeah, no. That's the only time when I'm at Starbucks and they're like, "Is it Megan?" I'm like, "Yes, thank you. That is correct."
I was like, "Why does it matter? You can spell it however you want.
It's true,
as long as you pronounce it the same way."
You're right.
It's true, but for some reason, I think that a lot of them are traumatized for all the names they've misspelled. So they're like,
"That's true. That's true. Forget
I'm
about
gonna get this one right." So we wanted to talk to you today about interpreters because of just what's happening in the world around us today, what's happening at our southern border with the migrants and the asylum seekers that are coming to our border. We're actually finding that a lot of them don't speak Spanish. And so we kind of want to talk about that today. But let's start at the beginning. What is the role of an interpreter?
Oh my, okay. That's like, do you prepare the 1 minute, 5 minute, or like 5 hour answer to that? So in really, really simple terms, for me, and this is more of a personal answer, to me, an interpreter gives somebody else a voice. I'm giving somebody a voice. As I would say, more of a critical linguist, but just also somebody who has seen what's going on in the world of interpreting in the United States. It's also an advocacy role. And it doesn't mean, I don't really know a great way to say it. It's not advocacy willy-nilly. You can't just go in there and break all the interpreting rules and be like, I'm going to advocate all the time. But it's certainly, I think, an understated or perhaps misunderstood part of being an interpreter. So number one, you are somebody's voice, and that's 99% of what you should be doing as an interpreter just under like normal circumstances, but you absolutely need to go in being prepared to advocate. And I think for me, at least, that's where the critical linguistics part can and should come in.
Okay, and what do you mean by critical linguistics?
Good question. And it's hard, right? Because as an interpreter, you're out there on your own being sort of a bridge between two possibly completely different worlds, right? So like what advocacy means for each interpreter can be different. And what my advocacy looks like is going to probably be very different from any other interpreter. But my advocacy is coming from and this is where I said the critical linguistics part of understanding the power differentials that happen because of language access or no language access. The power behind language, the power that certain people have in using their language. So it's just really being aware of all of those dynamics, all of the structures that are in place that, hi, Kitty. Sorry. That are probably always at play in these situations. So I think maybe my approach to interpreting and interpretation is always going to be couched or framed in terms of critical linguistics, knowing that there are lots of structures in place that are going to affect those interactions.
What kind of training or certification do interpreters need to have before they can do the kind of work that you've been doing?
Okay, so I'm going to come right out and say I'm not certified, okay? And that may or may not make people think that I'm qualified to speak on this topic, but certification is going to be different depending on where you're working and what kind of interpreting you're doing. The two types of certification that exist that I'm aware of are for medical interpreting and legal interpreting. So if you want to be a certified medical interpreter, and I think it surprises sometimes people, you actually don't even need a college degree. You need a high school diploma. You need to complete an accredited sort of preparation program that I believe it's 40 hours right now, but they're going to increase it to 60 hours at some point. So a lot of times people will take a college course or like a college certificate. I did a boot camp, an interpreting boot camp. And then once you complete that, you can go and take the actual certifying exam. So to become a certified medical interpreter, there are actually two different exams available. To become a court, so legal interpreter, a certified one, there's one single exam, the Federal Court Interpreter Certification Examination. That's if you want to be certified. And are there people out there working who are not certified? Of course there are. So that's like a whole nother issue as far as how is it that you can work and do this sort of work as an interpreter and not even be certified. We can talk about that. We don't have to talk about that.
Well, I'm thinking immediately of how like there is such a desperate need for interpreters in the legal system that, I mean, then you're like, well, is it better that you can do it without certification, or is it harming anyone? It's what a almost a clusterfuck.
No, it is.
Like
That's
so
a perfect word
yeah.
for it. That's a perfect word for it. I endorse that term for this situation. Just because I know the U.S. is way behind the times as far as understanding multilingualism, right? And what I mean more by that is just how are we providing language access to people? If you look at places like Europe, they're so on top of it, right? And yet still in the U.S., we have situations where we're like, oh, we need an interpreter, really? And it shouldn't be happening. There are laws in place that would be covering this, and it still happens all the time.
So what are those laws that are in place?
Okay, I actually write all these down because I actually teach this stuff, but it's
It's a lot.
It's messier than I think it should be, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you trace it back, it started with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the sectors that affected with regards to language access were healthcare settings. So, obviously like hospitals and doctors' offices and things like that. Education, legal and court settings, and also housing services. So initially, that should have been enough to get you language access in those sectors. But then in 2000, we got something from Bill Clinton called the Executive Order 13166, or just EO 13166. The title of this was Improving Access to Services for Persons with Limited English Proficiency, which most of us just say LEP persons. And it's basically reaffirming Title VI, right? But I guess it happened for a reason. And so it means that language-based discrimination constitutes a violation of Title VI. And it was very clear that federally supported and federally assisted social service agencies need to provide language assistance services for persons with LEP. And that's where we start to get into exemptions and caveats and exceptions and things like that, because what's federally supported and federally assisted, right? So then, and that's why, because then all of these institutions were like, wait, does that affect us? So then in 2001, the Office of Minority Health of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said, okay, we're going to create a set of standards so that the implementation happens and works, right? And so these were then called National Standards for Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services. And still, even with that, then they started to get all this pushback of like, okay, this is going to cost too much. We can't afford this. Then there was even more. The Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice published guidance on the implementation of that executive order, which is 13166, to determine basically, do you have to do it or do you not have to do it? And it's really interesting because the exemptions that they set forth really put a lot of pressure on particular places. And I'm getting a lot of this information from a paper by Glenn Martinez, who is at the Ohio State University. Really amazing paper, but it was specifically about healthcare settings. So that's a lot of what this information is about, but I would imagine that it would apply to other settings as well. But the people who essentially did not have to provide language access were if the organization had a small budget, if the organization focused on non-emergency, non-life-threatening conditions, or if they were located in a geographic region with low proportions of LEP persons. So then we just start to get this division of like, okay, well, you actually don't have to do it, but then all of the other places do. And so it's this disproportionate application of these mandates, right? So that's where it gets really, really interesting.
Well, and it seems like it shouldn't be the case that people are fighting to get out of providing language access to people. Like it's just simple. Why? That's fucked up.
Well, you know why?
Money.
It costs money.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing is that people are like, wait, we can't afford this. So how can we get out of it? Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I agree that it's probably funding. Yep.
Yeah. And so when it comes to the courts, is that cut and dry? You need to provide an interpreter in the courts?
Yeah, but does it happen?
Right.
Does it happen? Right. And I think what we see is that you have basically a staff interpreter for the most commonly spoken languages in the area, which in a lot of areas is going to be Spanish and perhaps one or two other languages. But for the topic that I know that we might be addressing in a few minutes here, what about the less commonly spoken languages? What are you going to do with that? Because if under these mandates, you have to provide language access for any LEP person receiving these social services, but the language that you're needing to interpret to and from is extremely uncommon in the United States, then what are you going to do?
Yes, and there are many. There are many languages.
Yep, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's talk about some the those languages. So probably, I'm assuming most of them are spoken in Mexico or Central America. Is that correct?
Meaning like those coming from Latin America, or?
So the people who are less likely to be able to even access interpreters in the United States.
Oh, they can come from anywhere. Anywhere.
They come from anywhere?
Anywhere,
Okay.
yeah, yep.
But at the southern border right now,
probably
the majority of them.
Guatemala, actually.
Guatemala.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so what languages are they, do they come with? Do they need interpretation support in?
Oh my goodness. I have no clue. That's a great question. I mean, so like a lot of Mayan languages, yes, people coming from Mexico as well. People coming, like I said, from anywhere. There are lots of indigenous languages spoken in South America as well. That's not where a large number of immigrants are coming from right now. But like Quiche or Cachiquel or any of those languages, Nahuatl, do we have people prepared to interpret in legal settings and in medical settings too for those languages? And if not, how are we going to make that happen? Because that's a mandate. Like that has to happen, but how is it going to happen if there's a single Quiche English interpreter in the US or none?
And I wonder, since there are so few speakers of these Guatemalan indigenous languages, what is the incentive for them to do this? Because would they have to volunteer? Is there money to pay interpreters? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a court interpreter, yes, you get paid, but the more training and preparation you have and certification you have, the more you get paid, right? Well, these people are probably not going to get certified because they're going to get called maybe once or twice a year to work. So what's the incentive to go get certified to be able to do like 10 hours of work a year, right? So like already they're probably going to get paid less because of the category that they're in, because they're not a certified interpreter. And the work is like piecemeal. It's maybe like 10 hours one week in January and a couple more hours in March or something. So the incentive is probably not there. They see the same thing in the health sector. It's the same thing where you have even trilingual interpreters. So say like Quiche and Spanish and English. And they were saying, yeah, it's a great skill to have, but I can't even get a part-time job out of this. So what's the incentive?
Right. And even now, is it still a part-time job, or is all of these people that are coming to the southern border, are there enough speakers of these indigenous languages that it is, more
right.
than just a part-time job?
Right. I don't know exactly what the situation is right now, or, like when we had larger numbers back in 2014. I can't speak to that, but my sense is just that it's not enough of an incentive, even if maybe you could like piece together a part-time job or a full-time job for 6 months or an entire year. It's probably not going to be ongoing.
Right. And then these interpreters or these people that would decide to be interpreters would have to go to where these people are, because they might not even live in the area, right?
They do just phone interpreting.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Which is probably not the best.
Right.
It's something.
But it's better than nothing.
Yes. Yep.
So then that makes me wonder, what does a typical day for a legal interpreter look like then? Or interpreter at all, if they're doing these phone interpreting?
And again, I'm not a certified interpreter, so I can't speak exactly to that. And I think it depends what kind. Are you in immigration court, or are you like in civil or criminal court, right? Because you can be an interpreter in any of those. But of course, criminal court is going to look way different, because you're probably doing like depositions and like talking about what happened if it was a crime or something, versus immigration court where you're talking about credible fear, arrival dates, what are the situation in your country, why did you leave, why are you here, things like that. So the situation of interpreting right now is really interesting, because a lot of times there are like language or interpreting agencies that sort of, I hate to use this term, but like farm out their interpreters. So if the court system needs like a quiche interpreter, they'll go contact like Interpreting LLC and they'll say, hey, do you have a quiche interpreter? And they'll be like, yep, I'll get them on the line for you in 5 minutes, right? So it could be like where me as an interpreter, I just sit at home all day and, you know, I either know my schedule or I'm like on call and I can just like get notification from my agency that, hey, we need you, get on the phone in 5 minutes. So a lot of it could just be from home. And that's why I say it could be piecemeal. You probably don't have a regular schedule. If you're going out to places doing like actual court interpreting or like medical interpreting for a medical examination, yeah, you would know ahead of time. But a lot of times phone interpreting is just like you're sitting at home taking the calls.
Oh. Wow, hadn't even considered that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm thinking, okay, so some of this is happening over the phone, and you mentioned before critical linguistics. So these asylum seekers are trying to tell the courts that I fear for my life. What could possibly be lost through an interpreter? Do you have to be careful when you're interpreting these people's fears?
Okay, so if you're certified, nothing should be lost ever. But that's the danger, and it's the roll of the dice if you're choosing to have a non-certified interpreter or a non-trained interpreter, right? And so those are the questions that we have. Is it better to have a non-trained interpreter than to not have one at all? What are the implications or what are the possible risks, right? Is it better to have a non-certified interpreter who might completely change your message, but something is getting across versus maintaining your message, but not having a voice? It's so difficult. It is so difficult. And studies have been done, linguistic studies and other studies showing what the outcomes of are having non-certified, non-trained interpreters. And it is scary. It is scary. Deportation, death, getting your child taken away from you. That's scary. And you're putting your life in somebody else's hands if you're having an interpreter versus, not having one at all and then not saying anything. Like those are the options for you. That's horrible.
The whole situation is really horrible.
Yeah.
Putting your life in the hands of the court, who has no necessary reason to actually want to help you. It's not really set up for that.
For sure. Which is why why I was mentioning, like, the U.S. is really behind in this of understanding language access is a right. It's so much seen as a privilege, like, oh, you're lucky that you got an interpreter, or you're lucky that your message got across. You don't speak English. Why is it seen as a privilege? It's a right, But the system is set up such that, oh, well, we're going to have to wait 3 hours, even though you're in the emergency room, to get a quiche interpreter on the phone, or we're going to have to delay your hearing for a week because we can't schedule your quiche interpreter for another week or something.
Right.
The burden falls on the LEP person.
Yeah. In the emergency room, especially, that just seems so terrifying. You could die.
You could. And people have.
Or you could just be like in more pain for longer. There are all sorts of implications of that. Ugh. And I already hate the ER.
Well, that's the thing. Is like people already have, not everybody, but lots of people already have an inherent fear of these systems, of the legal system, of medical systems. And how about we just augment that by 1,000 by not giving them language access to it? I cannot imagine the fear.
Right. And even when you delay a court proceeding, they are stuck in these detention centers.
I was in one in January for a week interpreting, and the amount of anxiety and insomnia there is just, it's unbelievable.
I can only imagine. Now people are like sleeping on the dirt outside now.
Yep.
Like it's getting... Oh, and they're also putting gay people in solitary in these detention centers now.
I had not heard that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I just heard it yesterday. Things are getting even worse.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So when you were at the detention center, were you interpreting? You were interpreting there.
I was. Yep.
And so they are providing some interpretation services in detention centers?
No. So I went with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so it's just a group of pro bono lawyers who were going in attempting to get people out on bond or parole. And so I was their interpreter. It's so complicated. It's, oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't know. And so I know that you had asked me to think about, what can we do if we're not interpreters? Those are the sorts of organizations we can support because I was there doing it. They're making stuff happen under very difficult circumstances, right? I'm starting to do what's called remote intake. So doing intake over the phone with people who are detained in detention centers to speed up that process. So just doing it straight up in my case, in Spanish and English, because that's my language pair. And that's on behalf of Raíces. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Yeah.
So, even
they're in Texas, right?
Exactly. Any sort of support for those organizations, because they're making it happen. They're getting the language access out there. But it's all volunteer work.
I think a lot of us don't think about these type of things when we're giving our money to organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center or what have you. These are things that seem so simple or small, but it's not. And to know that that's what they're using our money for is really, it's great to hear. Not that I doubted them, but it's just something I don't think about. Like, you think about the big things that you can see.
Right. And it's not tangible. You're not seeing the attorney sitting in their office for like 12 hours a day. I mean, the number of cases we went through the 1 week that I was there, I was shocked. It was incredible, the efficiency, the amount of work that we did. And I can't speak for every organization, but I was proud to be there. And I was so happy I was able to do it because they're making it happen.
That's great. They're definitely a great organization, but it's really great to hear that they're also efficient.
Yeah. I mean, given all the circumstances, because my goodness, it's just an unbelievable amount of paperwork and organization and coordinating, and just getting into a detention center takes an unbelievable amount of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, they don't like having people come into them in the first place. So,
nope.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you know if there are any particular languages that are language pairs or triplets that are needed, or is that outside your area of expertise?
I mean, probably all of them in Guatemala.
All the Guatemalan languages? Yeah. I wish I knew what all of them were, but I don't.
We can look them up at some point. Yeah. And unfortunately, what ends up happening in those emergency situations, or this needs to happen right now situations, is you do just like chain interpreting. So this is so wrong in so many ways, but often if it's a parent and they have a child there who speaks Quiche Spanish, the child will interpret into Spanish, and then somebody like me who does Spanish English, I'll go from Spanish to English. And so it's like this chain, but then you're relying on somebody who's not trained, not qualified, and also
a child
in a very, very precarious, stressed, difficult position already to do more work. And that's really unfair, but it happens.
Yeah. Again, it's like, is it better to have the child interpreting or have nothing happen at all? Yeah. But it's so much stress for that poor child.
I wonder when unaccompanied minors arrive and they need interpreters, again, talking about critical linguistics and this power differential, what is it like to interpret for a child?
It's a great question. I mean, as an interpreter, I would not approach it any differently because my job is to preserve their message however they deliver it. So we think about things like register and formality and pragmatics and lexicon and dialect. Which dialect are they speaking? So as a good, I'll say, linguist coming at it from that perspective, like, it should not be different. But thinking of the advocacy part, right, is, if you're getting the sense that the child is really not understanding, they're not understanding the legalese that are getting hit with or whatever it is, that's where you might have to advocate and stop the interaction and say the interpreter would like to signal that it appears that the child's not understanding, or perhaps more clarification, or perhaps we can change the register or whatever it is. I mean, I wouldn't use register because that's linguistics, but
right.
Initially, the approach should not be different, because that's what I would do for anybody I'm interpreting for. I need to be ready to advocate for them, but preserve their message however I possibly can.
And there'll be some adults who won't necessarily understand either, so the same issues could still arise.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned one technique by saying that you can stop it and say they don't seem to understand. Are there any other ways that interpreters can help by kind of coming out of the interpretation and talking directly to the court?
So what we say when we're getting trained is that you should be the least amount of invasive as you can be when you're doing these advocacy things. And there are like different levels of invasiveness, right? You can start like really low scale and just say, this is the interpreter speaking, or the interpreter would like whoever in this case to know that it appears that the client, the patient, whoever doesn't understand, perhaps whoever you are could repeat it in different terms or give a different rendition of that. And then you can kind of scale it up to the point of just completely like stopping the interaction and saying, you know, we need to like recast this whole thing, or this person's completely lost, or perhaps you would consider explaining what asylum is, or refugee status is, or what special immigrant juvenile status is, or any of those things, right? So the amount of stopping the interaction and advocating is scalable, and it sort of is just dependent on how, like what the sense you're getting as an interpreter that the person you're interpreting for is lost or unable to follow or whatever it is.
Have you interpreted for a child under these circumstances for the like asylum cases?
No, I've only interpreted for children in medical settings.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And how young have they been?
Tiny. I mean, I don't know how old kids are when they start to talk. That's horrible as a linguist. I shouldn't say that.
Pretty really young.
However,
you know, like 2.
However old they are when they start speaking. Little kids. But the situations were different. It was like checkups to be able to get into preschool or kindergarten or things like that. But I've also interpreted where a parent is in the room and they brought several children with, and you interpret for everybody, and so it's little tiny all the way up to 15, 16, 17. So
right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow, that must have been difficult.
Yeah. But they train you for that. Like, you're always trained to interpret for multiple people at once, or if people are talking at the same time, you're prepared for that. So
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
When you did your boot camp, did they at all address what would happen if you come across people who are deaf or hard of hearing?
Oh yeah, so that actually sign language has completely different, I would say, like boot camps and training and things like that, and they're like way ahead of the curve. Like, they're way better than probably everybody else. They have many more, I think, standards and like best practices and things like that. They're way better.
Okay.
Yeah. We're way behind the times.
But I imagine, if it's someone from Guatemala,
oh my goodness,
that comes.
I mean,
what a night! Like,
I don't know.
Just not equipped for that at all.
Not at all. I agree. Nope.
Yeah. I don't even know what what sign language do they use in Guatemala?
Right.
I don't even know that. I know Nicaragua has one.
Yeah, and I've been seeing that even like some communities will create their own, or maybe it's the entire country. I have no idea what you would do in that situation. That would be so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, there might already be an answer out there, and listeners can let us know.
Yeah, please. Please. Mm-hmm.
I have a question that, I assume that I know the answer because I assume all of this is so nefarious when it comes to immigration courts, but are there officials that try to get away with not providing the interpreter, just like passing it through really quickly?
I don't know if I can, will I get in trouble if I say, like, is the government going to come after me?
They haven't come
I mean,
after
if the
us
government's
yet.
gonna
Okay,
if the
good.
government's gonna come after you for that, we're way beyond where I think we're at.
Okay, so yes. but I mean, I think, yes to that, but yes in so many other settings I've seen.
Yeah.
Yes in the
Yeah.
health setting. Yes in school settings. And I think it really all comes back to, like, language awareness, language ideology. What does it mean to get language access? Is it a right or is it a privilege? And I think the people who want to push it through and just be like, oh my gosh, just get by with what you know, or oh my gosh, just use your kid as an interpreter. That's really, it's coming from a very particular perspective, right? And so lots of people who don't understand how important language access is could possibly be the ones saying, we're good. Like, let's just go without one. And I don't think that most people who are limited English proficient would be the ones to stand up and be like, no, give me my interpreter, right?
They might not even know that they have that right.
Exactly. Most people in the US wouldn't know, that somebody should have that right. So somebody who's just arriving to the United States to be expected to know the intricacies and the requirements and the legalities, that's just so much to expect of a person.
Well, and I can't imagine you'd want to, like, step out of line.
That's
right?
the thing.
So, like,
Yeah.
like, you wouldn't want to, like, ask for more than
Exactly.
and be, like, denied,
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
For us non-interpreters, do you happen to know if, like, could we, like, advocate for policy change and, like, giving more money to interpretation services, or is anything like that happening? Because it sounds like money is what needs to happen.
Meaning for, like, large scale change, or?
Right. Or is the best thing to do right now to give to places, to small nonprofits, these pro bono lawyers and such?
Gosh, that's such a tough question. To be fair, like, I ask these questions in my class all the time and I never have to answer them myself. So I just listen to everybody else's answer and ponder them. I never thought somebody would actually ask me. I mean, I think that goes with anything. How does change happen? Does it happen through policy? Like, do we press our legislators? Do we put our money to kind of put a Band-Aid over the problem where it's happening right now? And I think all of the above, because do people who are sitting in a detention center deserve language access right now, immediately? Of course they do. And so somebody like me who has language skills, I'm happy to do that. And guess what? You don't even need to be an interpreter to do that. You can totally do intake in, whatever language. In this case, it's probably mostly going to be Spanish, and you don't have to interpret. You can just do the intake in that language. But you can also support monetarily these organizations that are providing the language access, or you can go out and advocate for better policies, or, like for me, what I try to do in my classes is say, we need to change ideologies, which is huge. That's systemic, and that's going to take forever, and it's going to require a lot of effort. But can we work at it little by little in lots of different locations? I would say yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the advice that I have for anyone who wants to be better about this kind of stuff is to, like, just stop and think about what other people are experiencing. And it might just start with, like, thinking about how not everyone has access because they don't speak the language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I think about is sometimes, because we always think at the federal level, but especially right now, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
But you can also work at the state level or even the municipal level, and actually that's where a lot of really good change can happen. So maybe go to your city and say, how can I help you, like, actually serve LEPs in this community better?
For sure. And education, like, for me as an educator, I think, how can I use what I know to help my students become aware, so that when they go out and become health providers, or when they go out and become attorneys, or when they go out and become teachers themselves, are they making sure that interpreters are available for parent-teacher conferences? Are they sending home all the school materials in the languages that the parents speak? Things like that,
Yeah, that's a really good point. It was, I was at the doctor the other day, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a sign that said, it is your right to have an interpreter.
Oh,
and it had it in
wow.
all these different languages. And
Beautiful.
I was like, I have never seen that before.
Beautiful.
No,
So,
me
like,
either.
you know, even if you're like a pediatrician or you're some sort of doctor, putting a sign up like that says like, you know,
That's beautiful.
This is your right. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I have so many students who are like psychology majors or PT, OT, places where I think they come into my classes thinking, well, what do I need to know this for? Like, people don't need interpreters in these sectors. Yes, they do. And I'm so glad they're taking the class to understand how they can continue to advocate in those places where we would traditionally say, what do you need an interpreter for? Occupational therapy? Yeah, you do. What does a social worker need an interpreter for? Yes, you do. And I'm so glad that we have students going out who have that understanding now.
Right.
Yeah, that's really great. And that's exactly the best part of education is being able to,
Yep, for sure.
help people understand, for me, language and linguistic discrimination, but whatever topic.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And to see that shift happen throughout the semester.
Oh, they're quite resistant when they arrive.
Oh,
Right,
yes.
exactly.
Oh, yes.
More just because,
I know.
and I always, it's not an interpreting class, the one that I teach, but I say, if you're going to be a provider, you need to know this stuff because you're going to be the one who can say, we need an interpreter here. Or you could be one of those people who are like, nah, we can get by. And I don't want that to continue to happen.
Right.
That's great.
Well, I think that you've mostly already answered it, but is there a way to sum up why it's so important to have an interpreter?
So for me, like I've already mentioned, language access is a right. It is not a privilege. And for those of us who have not felt what that feels like, especially in linguistic terms, our language is our identity. And our language is our ability to be agentive. That is the way we can have agency. We can do things and have power. And therefore, if we take away some of these language and their language access, we're taking away their identity. We're taking away their power. And so just thinking about what would I do if I didn't have my language, if I didn't have my voice, you know? And I can't even imagine how I would get through life like that, my everyday life, much less how would I get through a legal system or a health system or an education system. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. So the importance of having language access in these sectors cannot be overstated. And the actual application of the regulations that are in place, I wish it would happen fully. But, you know, the more we learn about it and the more we can put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, maybe we can start to push for it in our everyday lives locally, like you had mentioned, and hopefully we start moving in the right direction.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Again, it's just being aware. That's the first step. It's absolutely the first step. So I'm so happy that you were here to talk to us and we get this out to our listeners and make more people just aware and so that they can take the next steps themselves.
For sure.
Yes. Thank you so much.
If you're a certified interpreter and you're listening, I'm sorry if I said wrong. I'm in the academic world. I've tried my best to understand interpreting, but you know, I think we can both learn from each other. I've learned so much from the interpreting world.
Definitely. Yeah.
So much. So I'm really always happy to get feedback from interpreters, and I think our perspective too, coming from linguistics, can really help that field too. So
yes, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
And we will definitely have to send this episode to the Troublesome Terps.
Yeah, we have some
podcast all
interpreter
about
friends.
Interpretation. It's amazing.
Oh, they're going to come at me. Oh, no.
No,
They're so
They're
sweet. They're so sweet.
Men.
Okay.
They're
So sweet.
so lovely.
Okay,
Well, we like to leave our listeners with our final message. Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
I love
Thanks
it.
again, Megan.
Thanks, y'all.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.